you are the founder of an incredible organization called Evolve, Move, Play. Tell my audience what Evolve, Move, Play is, what the philosophy behind it is, and why you created it.
Yeah. So the idea of the brand name, it's kind of the idea, the original idea at least was in the brand name.
Mm,
We evolved from movement and we evolved to learn movement primarily through play. So how do we take that power and help people develop more meaningful and more sustainable movement practices? That was the essential idea. As it's developed, I really became interested in the idea that the reason that I was moving was because it gave meaning to my life.
mm,
So it movement practice unlocks meaningful experience. So then why?
yeah.
And how do we cultivate that better? And how do we put that into an ecology of practices? Through movement and mindfulness, we're able to get into the embodiment
Mm,
of the self. And then through the parkour practice and the nature connection practices, we really start to understand how we're embedded in the broader environment. And then through rough and tumble body to body practices, dialoguing, storytelling, that starts to then help us really deeply understand and better attune ourselves to the social relational environment.
How long would you say it actually took to sort of layer on all of those different elements that you just mentioned?
Yeah. So I started parkour, like I said, 17 years ago, and I was an anthropology student at the time. And
Mm,
right away, it had this sense of I was teaching gymnastics, and so it's like when I saw parkour, it was kind of like discovering the primal underpinnings of gymnastics.
mm,
And it felt like a better representation of the way humans inherently played everywhere. But it wasn't complete because it didn't have that rough and tumble and object oriented types of play. And so I got interested in play research and understanding that, like, if you look just at physical play, all children do locomotive play, which is like parkour. They
mm,
do object oriented play, like, blocks and sticks
mhm,
and throwing balls. And they do rough and tumble play, social relational play. And so it's like, well, we should be doing all of those within our practice, was my sense,
mhm,
right from 2005, 2006. In 2014, I think, was when I really started thinking about this idea of, at the time, I called it the self-worth esteem. Like, I thought we got the conversation backwards. It wasn't so much that we had a lack of self-esteem in our culture.
mm,
It was that it's kind of like a design fault of capitalism,
okay.
that it because of the if the system is optimized for capital production, then it wants each individual
Mhm.
to spend as much time as possible where they have a comparative advantage.
What do you mean by comparative advantage?
So let's say that, we'll just say that there's like 5 core skills. We'll just call them whatever. It's like cooking, cleaning, fighting, um, you know, uh, mechanical skills, whatever the skills are. We'll
Yeah.
have 4, right? If we're exactly the same across 3 of them and I have a 10% advantage in one of them, then I can get more in a trade with you by spending all of my time on the one thing, right?
Mhm. Okay.
So we produce more capital by getting people to to specialize their efforts in the areas where they have the greatest comparative advantage,
Mm, okay.
right? So if you have a town that has a water mill and it's right next to an area that has good grain production, it's like everyone's is going to grow lots of grains rather than making sure that they also have animals,
Sure.
because they can trade with the next village over to get the animals. And so that's how trade works, which is great, and it's
Mhm.
enriched the entire world. But if you look at it as a system over time, what it's done has actually been incentivize people to abandon more and more of the production of the things that give their lives meaning,
Mm,
right? So
yeah.
uh, like we don't sing anymore, we
Yeah.
let professionals do that,
Mm.
right? We don't dance anymore, we let professionals do that. We don't cook our own food anymore, we let
Mm.
professionals do that. We don't even have sex anymore, we let professionals do
I hope that's not true.
that. Statistically, you can look at like the rise of internet porn and you can see the decrease of people's actual rates of
Oh,
sexuality.
wow. Yeah.
So no, we literally are sort of externalizing
Mm,
sexuality to a professional class. That's
mm.
how crazy it is.
But I'm curious, what does play mean to you? And also, why do you think we need movement to have meaning?
We have this very strong distinction between work and play
Yeah.
in English, and really in all the kind of Northern European languages. But if you look at a lot of indigenous cultures, you'll
Hmm.
find that the word that they use to describe some kids running around and playing tag is actually the same word that they would use to describe, a mother, you know, uh, grinding some grain. It's
Okay.
physical
Yeah.
activity. They just have one word for physical activity.
Mm,
Um, but within play research, the core idea of play is that it is intrinsically motivated or autotelic. It's not.
mm,
It doesn't. It doesn't exist for some other end.
mm.
So if you see two puppies chasing each other and tackling each other, there's no food that's going to be output at the end of that,
Sure.
right? Now, when the adult dog goes and chases a rabbit, then there's a food that's an output. But the purpose of it is just to fulfill itself. That's what
Hmm.
autotelic means. It's its own end. So anything that has intrinsic motivation and is autotelic could be seen as play. One of the things that we find that's interesting about play is that it tends to take the form of repeating behaviors with variation.
Mm,
So you'll chase and wrestle, but you'll do it slightly differently every time.
mm.
Um, and then you can even go down and say that there's actually neural circuits that are specifically associated with play. This is the work of Jaak Panksepp. I know you're a big fan of Jordan Peterson. He talks about Jaak Panksepp and his rats all the time. So
Okay.
Panksepp discovered that if you take two little rats and you let them, you let them play in an arena, and then you bring them back to the arena, and they can get access to it. They'll work incredibly hard to get access to play, and
Mm,
you can go in and put electrodes in their brains or imaging and find that there's a specific areas of the brains that are lighting up in anticipation of play or during play. And it's a reward circuitry that's distinct from the reward circuitries associated with like food reward or
mm,
sex or dominance. So it's built right into us. And it's really fascinating to evolutionary biologists because it has no direct survival purpose. But
mm.
animals will work really hard to do it. In fact, they've shown in macaques that when they're under nutritional stress, they will still play, even when the energy they burn in play means that it retards their growth. They will slow
Mhm.
down their growth physically in order to get access to play.
Mm. That sounds
So,
familiar because when I'm stressed, I will dance even
yeah,
though it will wear and tear on my body,
yeah,
and I will stay out dancing till 4 in the morning, which is not necessarily the most
yeah.
healthiest thing to do, but like I crave it. So that makes a lot of sense.
The way that you play is always reflective of the evolutionary history of your species, right? All
Mm.
human children love to climb trees, but dogs don't,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Dogs love to chase things and bite things and play tug of war. That's how dogs catch their prey. Um, Cats love to stalk and pounce, bite things, right?
Mm. Yeah.
It's reflective of the evolutionary origin. So your play is actually, it's sort of like evolution's built-in guide for these are the things you should be practicing to become a
Mm.
competent adult of your species.
Mm.
But the other interesting thing is play builds behavioral flexibility.
Mm.
And this is a point again that Pearson makes, which I think is really interesting. You take a rat, right, and you put it in a new environment. First, it's going to be terrified and it's not going to do anything. Then it's going to start exploring, and you can look at there's neural circuitry associated with exploration. Once it's explored its environment multiple times, it will discover all the resources. Here's somewhere that I can bed down. Here's some water. Here's some food. But all of a sudden, after a little while, it will start playing with how it uses its environment. It'll start changing and adding variations. And what you can think of that is that now, if something changes, the animal has become more adaptable to novelty. It can
Mm.
adjust its behavior when a change happens. And that's what we find when play is denied animals or individuals, they become much less flexible to change. So that it's very important for behavioral
Mm.
flexibility.
Mm.
Why is movement fundamental to cultivating meaning in life?
Mm.
Essentially, everything grounds out in movement because we
Yeah.
exist in order to move.
Mm.
The actual purpose of the brain
Mm.
is to control movement. And human beings, of course, have the most complex nervous systems that we've ever created. And we tend to think of that as primarily because we can think. What we don't recognize is that thinking is really bootstrapped on top of motor control. Human beings are not only the most flexible in thinking, we also have the broadest ability to change our motor behavior. Human beings are the only animal that mimics other animals.
Really? We're the
Yeah.
only animal that does that? I didn't
Yeah.
realize that.
Yeah. So if you go to any tribal people in the world, they practice dances and shamanistic practices that allow them to embody the mind of the predators and prey animals in their environment. In order to use my mind, I'm having to reference physical reference analogies, right? Our whole way of understanding, standing under things, is through physical analogies. So that the meaning in the world is actually revealed through movement. I think, therefore I am. Cogito ergo sum. But I would say I move, therefore I am. It's actually thinking is to guide movement. Emotion is to guide movement. So if you understand that, and you start to understand the mind as embodied, embedded, and extended, you start to realize that that's how we actually interact with the meaning in the world.